Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this 87th episode of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. We've got our regular panelists, myself, Billy Bob on the West Coast, Ben Toth in Page, Hungary, incomer from a suburb in Moscow, Carlo Parcelli from Washington, D.C., special guest, Greg Rosen from Chicago, Illinois. Thank you so much, Greg, for joining us. And we've got a lot to discuss this morning. Of course, it's only morning for me, and so that means it's morning. The title of our episode is Luxury Resort Diplomacy. That's a reference to this exclusive throwback medieval resort where the Genocide 7 is sitting with Genocide Joe, trying to figure out how to maintain their unipolar hegemony. But I do want to throw it to Ben to tell us more about this luxury resort.
Okay, well, we can go to Italy. It's in the sort of southern eastern coast. It's called Borgo Egnazia, a beautiful full medieval, very far from the people, where these guys can gather. And the best video I found of this ridiculous lineup, I'll just share with you, is got the best music, which kicks in after a couple of seconds, which I hope you'll hear. Already kind of chaperoning, this is the way to go, boss, because there's another video that probably everybody's seen about Joe Biden already wandering off, but I actually want to just flip it over because this was the best one. And this was the British Telegraph, interestingly, that shared these very popular people. Why can't I go full screen on this thing? Oh, shit. Sorry about this. I'll just share it with the Chrome. These are the actual disapproval ratings that they had, right? It's the gang of losers. That's the worst in 6 years, I think. But led by Rishi Sunak, he's going to be out. They cut off the frame of the two unelected Eurocrats, right? Which was Charles Michel on the left and Ursula on the right. And it's just a gang of people who are already out, will be out in a couple of weeks or months. It's just ridiculous. And they got together to show this beautiful show of unity. I have some sort of topics to discuss here, including that whole we're going to get this loan for Ukraine, but maybe switch over to Lost Joe Biden. I think this is just worth watching because there was a parachute thing, a display, and as usual, this is what we got. Yeah, it's behind him.
Oh, jeez.
He doesn't know where he is.
Wow. It's not about this guy, because this is. I almost feel
maternal instincts kicking in.
Yeah, he was a scumbag when he was young and bright, so I don't really feel bad for him, but I almost do. It's almost elder abuse at this point to drag this guy around. Yeah, but I'll get into some other details which I found really interesting about this thing. But this was the third in a row in the West. This is what they're doing. They're doing PR just to keep Ukraine fighting. We're going to sign a 10-year deal with you that's Trump-proof. Just keep sending those people. Just keep fighting for us, as you said. And this is the latest roster, which is really, really unfortunate. I don't think these girls are 20, right? And this is what. God. This is what's it's heartbreaking. It
really is.
It's horrifying, and all of this is fighting this PR crap that they're doing in the West. And this is after a NATO summit, one in Brussels for 2 days. It's been happening. It just ended without a breakthrough. No 40 billion a year for Ukraine. And before that, there was the Bucharest 9 in Bucharest, like another NATO grouping where they failed to do a joint communique because this time it wasn't Hungary. They kind of bought us off somewhat, but this was the Bulgarian guy, Radev, right? He said no on the Ukraine aid stuff. So they're trying to display this unity every place they can and failing. So why don't we open it up? Because I do want to hear everyone else before details.
Ian, you got anything?
No, I mean, nothing to add. I mean, it's funny. I wrote, it wasn't on my blog, it was on Quora. I wrote probably about a week ago about Biden not being able to string a sentence together. And there's always these people, like, they're not always even American. A lot of times they're European too, which is amazing, who hop in and say, oh, well, Biden's fine. That's just Fox News propaganda. That's what they say. This Fox News propaganda. You watch Fox News and you think Biden is falling apart. Oh, so if I didn't watch Fox News, well, I don't actually, which is funny. So it's like, is there like an alternative Biden that's not on Fox News? And are we looking at two different?
It's the conservative media bias. Everybody
Yes.
knows there's a conservative media bias.
Well, I mean, here's the thing about that argument too, because I'm sure. I mean, CNN and the more liberal outlets don't show those Biden freezing, Biden wandering, and getting lost. But even if he's good 90% of the time, which I don't think I think that's a very generous percentage to give him. But let's say 90% of the time he's coherent and aware of where he is. Well, what about that? That doesn't make that 10% better. A world leader with nukes can't be lost any percentage of the time. He needs to always be cognizant. So it's just.
Does anyone in Russia still believe he has, the nuclear suitcase, the codes, that this guy is actually in charge of anything?
I don't think anyone in Russia. Well, like people ask, who does Putin? Which candidate does Putin want to win? Which candidate does Russia want to win? Well, I think the answer is it doesn't matter. I think everybody in Russia has realized that it doesn't matter. Which can't neither. The president is almost just kind of a figurehead. I mean, on paper, he has a huge amount of unilateral power, probably far more unilateral power than anyone intended for the chief executive to have, when the Constitution is written and organized. But he's kind of a figurehead. There's that deep state that runs the show. And actually, I think this comment that just popped up, in Russia, we don't care. I think that's actually probably the most accurate.
Yeah,
statement.
and Putin calls it the permanent state.
Yeah. Pepe Escobar. What he pointed it out. Just this morning when I was watching him on Napolitano.
That was great.
To see those young women, and that's the first time I saw that. That's heartbreaking. I would not put my daughter in that position. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. That's insane. And I can't understand why the Ukrainian people are falling for this. And maybe we can get into that with Ian and his new piece, but and it's very, and then Blinken and Kirby and Sullivan, three guys that they look like Tony Perkins and Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, and then you got that lineup of potential dog catchers, leading Western Europe. It's a frightening scenario. They're so overmatched in every way possible that yet they think they've got this. They think they've got this thing under control. It's very, very disturbing, and the reinvigoration of the Ukrainian Nazis, the bad right Nazis. Now recently, it doesn't bode well.
Yeah, no, sorry, that was the after I don't know how many years, but the Washington Post shares, right, that the Azov battalion can receive U.S. weapons because the State Department concluded its investigation saying no evidence for wrongdoing, right? I found it hilarious that after that, a couple of days, Canada will not follow the U.S. Canada, where they fucking had a standing ovation for Yaroslav Hunka. They say, oh, we're not going there. Just a small funny addendum there.
Yeah, and their vice minister or whatever she is.
Chrystia Freeland,
history of generations of Nazis. I guess you'd want to put it that way. It's very discouraging. It's disheartening.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, as far as Ukraine specifically goes, I mean, it's hard to say. It doesn't show any. I don't see any indication that it's slowing down. I mean, I think we talked about the war tiers and the casualty estimates. Was it the previous show or 2 shows ago? I unfortunately don't remember when exactly we talked about. We did talk about their losses, but I mean, it's demographically crippling, but I don't see any indication that they can't continue fighting. I think they can, unless something changes. They are going to drag this out past the U.S. election, I think, at the way things are going. That's what I think.
Ukraine is trying to, and they're being encouraged to, but you check out, the Russian Ministry of Defense, who only do verifiable losses. It's between 1,500 and 2,500 a day. It's enormous, like huge. That's why you see these horrific pictures. And there is a self-preservation instinct that they're running for the border everywhere. Zelensky, when he signed up on the reconstruction conference in Berlin, the first appeal was to come home now. There will be peace once, but we need you now. And I don't think anybody's going home at this moment with half a brain cell.
So they're convening all these summits. They're trying to figure out, how they can salvage this and how they can, turn this big L into maybe a small L. But so we mentioned the few summits they were just finishing, and then tomorrow begins the big Swiss Peace Summit.
Come in the name of peace. Thank you for that beautiful video.
So, and it's unfortunate that Zelensky can't enunciate the word peace so well. But so the number of people joining that summit are declining, right? It went down from like 90 something people, and now only 70 something countries are going to join.
Yeah, it's constantly dropping. I mean, you can see the fear on his face, because it came out that he was mostly responsible for this peace summit, not the Swiss. They took, credit for it, but he wrote the invitations. He sent them out. He did everything. It's all about his legitimacy. Look, I'm still president. Pretty much everybody's out. Like, these G7 bastards are going to be there, and that's it. That's why he escaped from the Reconstruction Summit and flew like unannounced to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. MBS, please come to my peace summit, and then got back to the G7. And it's gonna be him, cackling Kamala, one of the Undertakers or the Vampire, whichever Carlo mentioned, the trio of the Biden advisor assholes. Kirby looks like a clown, right? Who were the other? Sullivan looks like a vampire, and the third one, Blinken's the Undertaker. Yeah, one of these are going to be there, and the negative, approval rating people from the G7. So,
and I think, by the way, Blinken, the Undertaker, I think he grows his hair out so long because he has a balding spot. That's what middle-aged men tend to do when they go bald, so they grow it out. So they can. I think that's. I mean, really, I think if he leaned over too much, his hair would come forward, and
I mean, he could just invest in a bandana, but
really.
So in the midst of this peace summit that's going to be tomorrow, I saw something on Telegram, and I don't know if it was legit, but apparently Zelensky claimed, according to Telegram, that she called him and told him he's going to stop, or he's not going to give Russia any weapons. I don't know if that was one of those Telegram hoax things or if that was legit. But what is legit is Putin's bombshell kind of peace initiative himself, where he laid out, hey, these are the best parameters for peace that we're going to be offering, and you guys need to take these, take this olive branch, or you will be responsible for, the results of what comes after. So are you guys, like, it really seems that Russia yesterday, gave kind of an ultimatum, and they said things are only going to get worse. Things are only going to escalate from here if you don't reciprocate to this olive branch we're offering. Do you guys, is this going to be seen, by historians as a huge moment?
I don't.
Yes, but not. Go ahead, Ian. Yeah,
take the Russian say. I mean, what he's saying. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be any one point like that's going to be seen as like some huge milestone, except to people who study the minutia, the details of it. But I think what he's stating is a generally true concept that's been true for the past 10 years. Each agreement, each consecutive offer that Ukraine turns down, the following one is less generous. And also, and this became, I think what's a bigger milestone than this one, this is just kind of a follow-up of the biggest milestone was the tentative, the draft of the Istanbul Agreement, which as of then, amazingly, Ukraine wouldn't have lost any territory besides Crimea, which was gone anyways and not even on the
in 2014.
table. They just had to respect the autonomy of those, which, as far as profits, as far as revenue, as far as economic growth matters, it wouldn't make any difference if Donetsk and Luhansk were autonomous. And so at that point, they would have lost no territory. And also we have to consider
that's March 22.
Right. Yes, March 22,
March, April,
2022. Yeah. Yep. And that was when Ukraine had had the best position of strength to negotiate from. They had the full unconditional support of NATO and the Warsaw Pact and the NATO stockpiles, and Ukraine's own stockpiles were completely full at that point. Their population hadn't. But yes,
and the Russians, withdrew from around Kiev as a sign of goodwill, which of course they treated as their first big offensive.
Yes,
Ukraine did.
Exactly. So that was when they had this position of strength, and even there were even a few pro-NATO and pro-NATO analysts saying this in the March timeframe. This is the best time for Ukraine to negotiate. And that window for Ukraine having a good position to negotiate from ended when Russia did their partial mobilization. And then it's just been deteriorating since then. Once they did that referendum that was I think the second big signal that Istanbul deal is gone. It's off the table because if you remember, I don't know who remembers, but if you remember right before that partial mobilization, right before the referendum was announced, not when it was done, but when it was right before it was announced, Russia had made another attempt to say we're open to negotiations. After Ukraine turned that down, Zelensky basically made it illegal to even talk to Putin, to negotiate with Putin until Putin's removed from power. That's when Russia announced the referendum. And so Ukraine went from not needing to lose any territory to now they've lost 4 territories. And so what Putin was maybe hinting at with this is that we're not going to offer this deal again. That could mean if Ukraine keeps playing around, if they go into Kharkov or some other territory, those territories might also be taken off the table, just gone. 4 territories might turn into 5 territories or 6 territories. And actually, I think what he was probably really hinting at is that Ukrainian statehood itself might be in jeopardy if they continue to not want to negotiate. So it's an open-ended statement. He made an open-ended statement, so that's how we should view it.
Go ahead, Billy Bob.
Well, I was going to say the other aspect that he was alluding to is a more aggressive approach to prosecuting the war itself. And maybe some of the gloves are going to come off and it's not going to be just a special military operation, but it'll be a war against, this government, which will include, attacking the government itself, perhaps. So I don't know. That's speculation, but there was definitely an innuendo or an allusion to prosecuting the war in a more aggressive manner if this peace deal is rejected.
Is that new? Because that sounds like someone westernized his comments at the SPIEF conference where he said, yes, we could speed up the war, but it would be proportional to the number of Russian losses, which is why we don't speed it up. That was his comment. And I think someone said, ooh, look, they want to be more aggressive. Couple of comments on this. First, I found you mentioned Zelensky mentioning Xi Jinping. And it's basically another one of these insulting lines, but it is real.
Phone conversation with a leader of China by phone. He said that he will not sell any weapon to Russia. That is the first. We'll see with you. We'll see. But he said to me, if he's respectable person, he will not, because he gave me the word.
Yeah, if the president of China is a respectable person, already implying that, he's a paranoid fucking cokehead. But yeah, I read all of this morning that I think that Putin's offer, it was extremely generous and designed that way because he knew these idiots will not accept. It was designed that way for the global south, saying, look, this is who we're dealing with. What he said was, 4 oblasts, remove your forces from Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, to the actual administrative lines at the time at which they entered Ukraine, and say no, explicitly no to NATO membership, and we will stop the fighting and we'll sit down to the table right away within an hour. That was it. And instantly, the Zelensky, Podolyak, Yermak, who reminds me of a Mortal Kombat character, they instantly shot it down, saying this is an ultimatum. No, we cannot sit. The victim can't sit at the table with the aggressor and all that crap. And that was to show them, see, these guys are doing the piss conference tomorrow. They can't be reasoned with, and therefore we shall continue as we have. That's my take on it. It was a masterstroke in diplomacy aimed at the rest of the non-Western world. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, I think it's the last chance for Ukraine not to become a rump state. And,
absolutely.
With the taking over Odessa and moving on and linking up with Transnistria, and actually when they do that, when the Russians do that, they will neutralize more problems. They will solve more problems than they would face if they didn't do that. And so they're just playing, I think they're just playing into the Russian hands. And then there's the interesting thing of the flotilla, let's call it that, going to Cuba, to Cuban Harbor. There's no Cuban Missile Crisis #2 because the United States isn't saying a word about it. I mean, well, behind the scenes, I'm sure it's a hot topic, but in the public sphere, it's not. And so I think Putin is quietly calling their bluff, and I think Putin can probably keep a lid on it, and move, but the insanity of the West and the immaturity of the West is astonishing. They never fail to surprise me with how adolescent they act toward every response, and also the new sanctions on Russia. What is it, the 11th or 12th list of sanctions?
That's mostly sanctions on China. We'll get back to that because that's one of the G7 achievements as they see it. But yeah, regarding Cuba, I think I didn't watch this, but I read somewhere that Lavrov said that you just don't listen to diplomatic signals anymore. And that's why you only listen to realpolitik. And that's the reason for the flotilla to be like 60 miles off the coast of Florida doing these hypersonic missile things. But yeah, the Russian political layer is enormous, but you can always judge Putin is the very restrained, the very polite wing of it, and then there's Medvedev. These I think he said asshole. I don't remember the Russian word, but bastard. The US and its asshole allies are waging a war against us without rules, and we should respond full spectrum everywhere. That is a legitimate part of the Russian spectrum of things, and I think people should pay attention to this. And I think it's had an effect. To me, it looks like it doesn't matter what Joe Biden is, but the leadership in the US is actually afraid of accidentally, launching World War III. They pull back the jets, don't send troops, Macron. Let's not. We can only allow the weapons to strike in the Belgorod Oblast, not anywhere else. But it's the European fucking chihuahuas who got emboldened under the NATO umbrella and thought it was undefeatable. It's these flashy, beautiful wonder weapons, and it turns out they're shit. When they're afraid and also completely humiliated in their local elections, I think that's when they're the most dangerous. I think these are the real Sikorsky, Kaja Kallas, who's almost out of her country, Macron, Scholz too. By the way, it's interesting that Germany, who was gung-ho about all these things after the US sent them. If the US sends a tank, we'll send a tank. If the US sends a rocket, we'll send a rocket, that sort of stuff. Apparently, Germany is the only force trying to stop the latest Russian sanctions. I don't know, 14th. I don't know where we are, the EU sanctions. And they're also working to kind of degrade this new tariffs on the Chinese EVs. It's like some people in Germany, not the Scholz part, are kind of coming to it like this is long-range doom for us, long-term doom for us. But these are the real fucking danger to the world, it seems to me.
So Ben, twice a week, every episode, he compiles like a headline summary, which I've been starting to include in the description of our show. So if you look in the description, you can link to his summary of the recent headlines since our last episode. And it just seems obvious reading that summary, if we're going to talk about confrontation versus cooperation, it's just absolutely clear that the West is doubling and tripling down on confrontation. Like there's no denying that anymore. Like, oh, well, maybe we can figure something out. Maybe we can, the US is going to back down. It's just like they're setting up, they're dividing the planet, with this block mentality, and it's us against them. And they're going, they're thinking in terms of the Cold War, where it was, us against them, and we just, we won the Cold War. The West won the Cold War, and they're thinking we can do it again. And that's the exact same strategy and mentality that they're embracing. I don't know. I think things are a little bit different. I don't think I don't think the odds are so good for them this time. But it's obvious that is the strategy they are pursuing. They're putting things in place. They're dividing, the world, and they're going to, just do whatever they can. So kind of what Medvedev said, right? And I hate to see that because like that's not good for anybody. This confrontation is not good for anybody. I hate to see Medvedev say, "Hey, we've got to just reciprocate," because where does that leave humanity? Where does that leave the planet? It's awful. But I don't blame Medvedev. It's the fucking West's fault because Russia wanted cooperation. They had the gas pipeline. They had all this trade with Western Europe. It was good for them. China, the world's, manufacturer. It's great. Everybody's benefiting. That's cooperation. The U.S. can't deal with that. The U.S. is the one demanding confrontation. We're losing. And it's not we. It's like it's the elites. It's the Western elites. And they're going to sacrifice our interests, in this useless war, this unwinnable war against Russia and China. They're going to sacrifice our interests, and then they're going to use their propaganda apparatus to try and convince everybody it's Russia's and China's fault. That's just how it's going to play out.
Yeah, and Zelensky, when's the last time he used one of his own weapons built in Ukraine? He even began by using old Soviet weapons. And China can send weapons to Russia. I don't care. North Korea can do it. Iran can send their drones. I hope they do. Yeah. I hope they do.
Yeah.
The resources of 50 countries merged in Ukraine, for fuck's sake. You can do it, and
really, exactly. Just
so
I watched something.
Russia's preparing for an entire war against the West. And I mean, they've got a manufacturing base, a military industrial complex that isn't run for profit, right? It's run to win wars. And like, I don't know if they're really needing, sure, they're getting some extra munitions from North Korea, probably, from Iran, sure, perhaps some drones, but these aren't, game changers. It's a supplemental, but Russia, they're not asking China, please send us some weapons. Like, we're not there yet. Could we be there after a war of attrition? 6 years of war of attrition. I mean, then maybe, but it's just kind of preposterous. But so, did Zelensky really talk to Xi, or was he getting fooled by those Russian guys that call up and always pretend to be some deal?
I don't think this one was a prank, but obviously diplomatic communications are not meant to be aired to the public at the G7. So I guess he's called another black mark with Xi Jinping.
And China's always said, we're not giving Russia weapons, and we won't give Russia weapons. They don't need them. So I don't know. I mean, it's a Western lie that China is giving weapons to Russia. I mean, that's just a Western propaganda anyway.
Yeah, I don't think there's really anything. I don't think there's even ammunition. I mean, there are ammunition calibers that are compatible with both Chinese and Soviet weapons, but I'm not aware of any even that going. I mean, what is probably being used by Russian armed forces are some Chinese aftermarket parts, some Chinese dual-purpose commercial products, helmets or sap. Kevlar and sappy plates, maybe that sort of drones, maybe that sort of thing. But Ukraine is also getting those things. So I mean,
drones!
Right.
Ukraine
so
uses China drones.
Right. So just saying, oh, I went on what's that? Oh gosh, what's that big Chinese website called? I'm drawing a blank on the name. It's
CGTN, Global Times.
No. It's like Amazon. You can buy junk on it. Like,
Alibaba.
Oh.
Maybe it's Alibaba. Yeah, there's a couple different where you can just buy
Alibaba.
AliExpress. That's the one I was looking for. AliExpress. So just saying. So Zelensky complaining, oh, some Russian people are buying some Chinese flashlights or whatever on AliExpress. I mean, it's like, okay, well, I mean, China doesn't prevent Ukrainians from. Oh yeah, that's right. Yep, AliExpress and.
Yeah, Baidu's the big search engine.
Taobao's
good too.
Yeah. So I mean, China doesn't care really who buys those products. So Zelensky complaining about it. I was like, what's China's really going to do about it? It's ridiculous. And and like Billy Bob said, it's the type of thing you say in private and then you don't advertise it. Maybe President Xi could theoretically agree, okay, we're going to tone down the support for Russia or whatever. Even if he did say that, he doesn't want Zelensky blurting it out to the whole world. That's just that's a big, like you said, a big black mark on them.
Remember how he treated Justin Trudeau for doing the exact same thing, like publicly airing diplomatic.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what about this? Obviously the U.S. is realizing that China is not going to be pulled into the Western orbit in the West's attempt to balkanize Russia, right? So what are they going to do? So they're going to create hostility. They're going to become hostile towards China, and they're going to do what they can to hurt China's economy. And they're gonna go up this escalation ladder, just like they did with Ukraine, right? And first it was the Javelins, and then it was the Abrams, and then it was the F-16s, and I mean, there's just this escalation ladder that they're going to go up. But they're doing the same thing with sanctions, it seems, with China, and of course, so China isn't interested in giving the United States an excuse, right? But they have their own red lines, and the West doesn't even need an excuse. The U.S. doesn't need an excuse. They have objectives, and crippling China's economy is an objective, and so whether or not they have an excuse, they're going to be pursuing that objective. But
okay, go ahead, Carla.
I just want to briefly say that was an excellent question that was asked, and what here we have the West and Zelensky saying, "I'm so disappointed that you're not coming to our PIS conference."
Bitterly disappointed.
Yes, and at the same time trying to undermine Chinese, the
aggressive beggar, right?
Security, yeah, economic security at that. So,
I had something.
Throw that out there. Hypocrisy.
As far as I can tell, this new round of U.S. sanctions was, inked by Joe Biden, and it was basically released to the public before anybody landed at the G7 conference in Italy. So it was like a preparation for that, and it is mostly, you're quite right, Branko. It's a Chinese sanction. It's mostly against third parties, mostly against Chinese banks and businesses that do these dual use component trades, also Turkish and UAE businesses. So they've gone above and beyond, and at the same time, the same thing happened with I think the Brits issued more sanctions, but on the so-called ghost fleet that Russia uses, for their energy transfers overseas. So they are this minimal cusp of the world that don't really produce anything. China trades with everybody in the world. Russia is the food and energy hub of most of the world. That trades with everybody, and they think that 2 years of sanctions, nothing has helped. It's gone the other way. They think, well, some more. some more will finally collapse them both, and they will be riots in the street, and Putin and Xi will be out there. I found it incredibly stupid how they can, still think that way after all this time. And something that I watched Jyoti Bra and Garland Nixon's excellent speech just an hour before for this is damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if you enter a war into China at the same time as you're losing in Ukraine, yeah, you're going to lose. But if you don't, you've already lost your influence, your way of extracting, free resources and free profit from the rest of the world. That's already gone. There really is no plan B, nothing else they can do. And just one further comment that Russia, after the sanctions, which were an initial shock, some things were a little hard in the beginning, but after that, they got sanitized from all that Western investment, and every graph went the fuck up. And within that is this hidden reality that Western so-called investments in your nations are actually parasitism, are actually vacuuming out value, A big fucking lesson learned in Russia, because ever since they're gone, it's like things are going fucking well again. Big economic lessons being learned by also the onlooking 80% of the world who are not aligned with NATO, Stan, and Washington. So that regard, very hopeful.
There, and Ben, I just shared a link to the private chat if you want to open
always
that up.
Do this to me as we are live. I'm going in the private chat now. Yeah, but I don't know how to okay, I can click it here.
Yes, you can just click it and then bring it up. But what you were talking about just now, I want to bring this up because I was going to make a blog post about this. It's very interesting. This is I've never read this author before, but he's Mark Ames. He was a journalist who was based in Georgia at the time of that 5-day war between Russia and Georgia in 2008. And he wrote this right after it happened. And it's he called it the day. And he's, by the way, not any stretch of the imagination a pro-Russian journalist. But he titled this "The Day America's Empire Died." And he basically he goes into detail about how Georgia, started what they thought was a quick, easy conquest of South Ossetia. And the big, most striking part of it is actually at the end. So if you actually want to scroll down, you'll see the page index at the bottom.
To the end?
No, scroll down. You'll see it's paginated. C4, go to 4. Just 4. C4. Yep, there you go. Now the last paragraphs here. Keep scrolling. Okay, there. So this is, what he said. Oh, not too far. Right there. So, this is really the big point he made that is really relevant to what you were talking about just now. So he said, we have entered a dangerous moment in history. America is in decline, reacting hysterically, woofing and screeching and throwing a tantrum, desperate to prove that it still has teeth. Which it does, but not in the old dominant way that America wants or believes itself to be. History shows that it's at this moment tipping into decline and humiliation when the worst decisions are made. So idiotically destructive that they'll make the Iraq campaign look like a mere training exercise, fender bender by comparison.
Good wording. I like it.
Right. And he said on the flip side of that, in a second, I won't read it because it's long, but Russia, he said, is as Hollywood speedballer from its victory. So it's basically, and we're in this period where Russia's ascendant and America's on the decline. And so Russia is going to behave more assertively and more aggressively than they would have previously, like in the early 2000s and definitely the 1990s. And the USA, on the other hand, is desperate and hysterical. So that's when you could potentially have, there's a huge risk of a World War III type situation. Like he said, it might just winds down into a different world order, a multipolar world order, but it could also escalate to World War III. So I think that's, considering that was written in 2008, I think that describes the current situation we're in now in 2024. It's prophetic, actually.
Yeah, that was 16 years ago, and it's proven quite true. And yeah, we're just getting closer to that doomsday clock, that monitors how close we are to the end of the world. So you mentioned that you might do a blog post on that topic, but you did just recently do a blog post on a different topic, which was kind of, it was related, but it was basically, on multiculturalism and the death of culture. So that is actually our future president,
Macho
that's
Camacho.
Camacho. And he just really exudes American culture to its fullest.
I have to
And
zoom into that.
And it's a real great administration that he will have. But let's talk about your point in this article, Ian, and what is it about the American people that allows and tolerates all this to go on, and most of them are not even aware of it, and some of them are even in support of it.
Well, so I'll go into details in that. So I'll just give a quick synopsis of that article. Did you post a link? I don't remember if you posted.
Yeah,
I think it's in the description.
Okay, perfect. So I'll give a quick synopsis. So this post, I wrote it on my blog, but it actually started as a question someone asked on Quora. So basically, he was asking, and it was specific to Britain, but my answer covered the USA as well. So basically, it was multiculturalism, the death of British culture, and I said no. British and American culture were already on the decline before anyone even suggested the idea of multiculturalism and I described basically.
Sorry, I can see the U.S. leftists ready to attack you just based on
that. But so basically, if you go back to 100 years ago or 200 years ago, so every country has. Throughout human history, there's always been an educated class of people. It was always a small class because mass education did not happen until after the Industrial Revolution. No one even had the idea that you could educate, the masses. But there was always an educated class of people. There was people who were, Renaissance men. Basically, they were familiar. They probably spoke more than one language. They were familiar with literature, historical knowledge. But now we've somehow gone backwards, and you can very much see that. Like if you look at Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Anthony Blinken or Sullivan, these people are really freaking stupid. They're not well educated, but you do have and you also have a technocrat class. So you have like in Silicon Valley, you have these guys who have STEM degrees and they're very smart in mathematics or whatever. Field of study they're in, but they have no cultural or social or class. Oh my gosh, I almost killed myself. Okay. They don't have what was historically known as a classical education. Imagine asking Elon Musk about, a book besides Harry Potter. That's actually the example I use in the blog. If you read a book besides Harry Potter, you're considered a genius. And actually what got me thinking about education was, I'm sure you've seen it on social media, they always talk about, the Russia's elite are fleeing Russia, the best and the brightest are fleeing Russia. And they'll say the same about China too. And actually, I used to think, these people are just, they're trolling. That is just maybe they're completely serious. So like imagine if you're an immigrant from Russia or China or Pakistan or wherever the heck you're from. You're just like I don't like
Andrei
Russia.
Martynov type.
You're just a guy.
You are channeling Andrei Martynov right now.
Yeah, but you're just a guy who, for whatever reason, doesn't like your country. You want to leave. So you go to the USA or you go to Britain. And if you're in one of those countries, even a much poorer country, a post-Soviet country, or even the so-called third world, you might, if you've gone to university in that country, even if it's a very poor country, you probably have a classical education. Even though you're not a Western person, you're still somewhat familiar, with Western authors, Western literature. So you come to a Western country and these things, you can speak good English, you're familiar with these classical authors. People think, wow, this guy's a genius. So they just assume that I actually say that in the article, if you're a Russian guy or a Chinese guy, you come to the USA and they just think you're just a genius because you can find China on the map. That just makes you a genius in comparison. So it's as our own society degrades and people get dumber, including our elites, because I describe it more in depth in the blog post. But basically, you have two classes of people. You have the small class of people who are well educated on a certain field of study for their career, for professional purposes, but they're stupid on everything else. And then you have the general population of people who are just completely uneducated. And the statistics, I mean, we've all seen those videos where they ask, where some guy will go out in the street, or he'll go onto a college campus and be like,
those
name
videos.
the first presidents who freed the slaves. Can you find these countries on a map?
You know what that does to Europeans? It doesn't make us happy or giggle. That scares us. Those campus videos. I've seen a few. It scares us.
Yes. And in my experience, Britain isn't any better. I'm going to be honest. Britain isn't any better.
Mine too.
I think they're in the same boat.
Ben, could you throw up that one quote that I sent us earlier? So, I mean, this kind of goes right along with what Ian is saying as far as the dumbing down of the masses. So, Roger Freeman, a key educational advisor to Nixon, then working for the re-election of California Governor Ronald Reagan, spelled out quite precisely what the conservative counterattack was aimed at preventing. We are in danger of producing an educated proletariat. That's dynamite. We have to be selective on who we allow to go through higher education. If not, we will have a large number of highly trained and unemployed people. The two most menacing institutional sources of the danger described by Friedman were obviously those two great public university systems charging no tuition, the University of California and the City University of New York. I think there is when we look at things through the lens of class struggle, obviously there's an interest on the part of the ruling class, the capitalist class, to make sure that the masses, the working masses, are not that educated and kind of ignorant and also divided, right, on cultural issues. And I mean, this is just necessary and, really in the interest of the ruling class to maintain this kind of a thing. And along with that is this other feature of capitalist rule. And it kind of can be succinctly described in one sentence. Everyone is to blame. No one is responsible. So doesn't that just typify how things are? Biden
really
can't be responsible. Biden's a fucking vegetable. We can't hold him accountable. But who is making the decisions? Who do we blame? Who is at fault for this fucking mess that they're diving
it's
us into?
You voting with your pocket, buying the wrong stuff. It's you. It's everyone. I really that is part of. Go ahead.
I'm here in DC, and my employment was I had a scholarly bookstore, and I had all kinds of people. In fact, I'll tell you something. When I went to a book sale in Northern Virginia, the most conservative, the most military-minded people, they had the best history books in the sale, donated, bar none. Okay, those people do exist in DC, and they control a lot of things. Otherwise, my bookstore would have failed. But I could sell everything from Shakespeare to Clausewitz to anything of a serious nature, and that's what we focused on, and we did very well because there was a clientele for that. In Washington, they know what they're talking about, and they do have these they'll surprise the hell out of you. You get in a conversation with George Will, he will floor your ass.
I was going to say, you met George Will, you met Edward Luttwak, right?
Yeah, Ed Luttwak. Well, he's a different little story. He's a little bit of an
anyway, I was going to say, because Brzezinski, he was a real skilled bastard. I'm just saying, where are these people today?
They're still around. They're still in DC. And they're calling the shots. This notion, I don't know where multiculturalism fits into this. I will tell you one thing. I was intrigued when I was listening to Pepe Escobar on the Danny Haiphong, because what he brought up, he said he was sitting at a table with a bunch of Chinese scholars, and what they wanted to talk about was Confucianism, which is something I brought up in this show, and how influential it is in Chinese culture, and that because the rigorous element of Confucianism was what was driving the ideological foundations of the Belt and Road Initiative. and Pepe broke it down. He said India, like I've already said, is too fragmented in its cultural approach to things. They have literally, you could wake up in the morning and create a new god in India. So that puts you at an ideological disadvantage when it comes to economic progress.
Yeah.
And then he also covered Islam, and it said it's fair, and it's produced some wonderful things in mathematics and the sciences and so on and so forth. But it's secondary to the rigorous discipline of Confucius, and he said it's the scholars themselves, the Chinese scholars, insisted that Confucianism was a necessary foundation for modern China, for what's happening. So here these people know. I mean, you talk about guys on knowing American history. There's a number of really very conservative pundits that know American history thoroughly. And if you don't, there's always somebody that can help you. There was an eccentric guy who used to go around, and he was the researcher for all these big name. Herman Walk was his main guy, the historian, and he used to do all the research. He walked around in this like 19th century. I can't remember his name offhand, but in this white old 19th century outfit that looked like all it was missing was a pith helmet, and it was filthy. But he was a great researcher, and he had access, of course, to the National Archives, and he helped numerous people write these important people in Washington write these books. But they also have a foundational knowledge themselves, and they do speak other languages. And
here's the thing, Carlo, this is why I believe it's a legitimate question, because we're only exposed to Blinken, Sullivan, these midwits. When it comes to academia, that fucking most slappable asshole, the so-called Yale historian who's anti-commie, Bloodlands, Stalin. Timothy Snyder, thank you. We just see this. So there actually exists, Brzezinski was competent. Henry Kissinger was competent. The Dulles brothers were competent. Are there still these people around? Because I don't see them from the outside.
They are. Yeah, they're
ideology trumps competency. I'm afraid.
I think I could easily make a used bookstore like I had still work in Washington, even in the days of now that we've had the internet. There was one other thing I wanted to mention, but it's gone out of my head. But maybe it'll come back to me.
Sorry, I just know that Brzezinski and Kissinger were respected enemies of the communists. They knew these guys are really competent. They're knowledgeable. They don't see that in the current layer anywhere.
No, Ben, I would say that, given the immense economic advantage that the U.S. had post World War II, that any fucking fool could have run that empire for 75 years, like anybody. So I don't think these are fucking great thinkers. And I think they're fucking evil to a huge extent. But how hard is it, with the immense advantages that the West had following World War II, to not run it into the ground for 75 years? I don't give those fuckers credit. But compared to what we have now, I would say, relatively speaking, yeah, they were gods. But that's not saying anything about them. That's just saying more about what we have now. But anyway, I don't want to lionize Brzezinski and those people. I
hope I didn't lionize them. I'm just saying they were competent bastards.
Yeah.
Well, it's like this last comment here. It's true. I'm sure you. I'm not saying educated people do not exist. It's a generalization. It's a question we need to ask: Is there enough of them? Are there a lot of them? And do they have an influence on national policy? I think we're at this point where it's very clear they don't have influence.
I remember. I'm sorry.
Because our national policy is unhinged and stupid, and so that suggests that the smart, educated people do not have good policy, are not at the wheel.
I would say that having a classical education like the 19th century, late 19th century scholars and elitists is no help. But I wanted to mention something about Ronald Reagan. When he was running for president, he had an advisor, and I'm going to just have to paraphrase what he said. But he said, "We can count on fooling or lying to the American people because they won't know the difference between lies and the truth."
Early
And so,
neocon, probably.
yeah, so that's one of the ways Reagan got elected.
Yeah.
The October surprise thing. I wish I
Straussian
could remember the
psychos.
quote better, but
I want to illustrate. Go ahead. Sorry.
oh, I'm sorry. And Lovett, Robert Lovett, who was briefly in the Truman administration and then the Roosevelt administration. He was the one that originally said, he was an ad man from New York. We can if we can sell the people such and such and such, then we can certainly sell them on the need for nuclear weapons. And he was one of the big people pushing for nuclear weapons. And they knew it was basically a hoax to promote the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower figured out through 2 terms and made his famous statement. That's all I wanted to add.
Ben, did you have something to say? I wanted to say one thing about this topic. If you're going to
Me
move
too.
on.
So we're going to stay with this topic. I'm just going to say, from those people that you mentioned, we already seen this, but look at these fucking people. Look at these. I mean, the 3. I don't know when I read the statistics, but during the MAP politicians in the European Parliament, the 3 top higher educations, the occasional gynecologist sneaks in, which I think was Ursula, but they are media studies, law, and political science. Absolutely, useless paper. And I want to tell you a short story about this, because a day before, just as we ended the show, on Tuesday, this was a day before the G7 summit said, yes, we're going to use the Russian assets the profits from it, to create a new loan of 50 billion to send to Ukraine. This was a day before, in Politico, getting the inside scoop from, I don't know, maybe like 10 diplomats, unnamed diplomats, that there's a big spat over it and they don't agree. And Macron and Scholz is going to break the bad news. And this is quoting one of these unnamed diplomats. What Washington is proposing that the US take the loan, Europe take all the risk, we pay the interest, and if anything goes bad, basically we are on the hook, and the US military industry takes all the profit from it. So this was clearly out there. Hey, we're going to show them. No, you're not. No, you're not. Biden just flew in, they inked the thing, and principally agreed to everything here. Not even culture, not even a self-preservation instinct, or they got overruled because they have huge blackmail on them. I mean, this is why I think Le Pen is going to be exactly the same as Meloni is, melanized. There's just no difference, This is putting you on the long-term hook for years and years.
But it looks like there's pushback, right? That hasn't happened yet. They haven't.
Well, it's a principal agreement. They said the details will be ironed out later, which they've been doing for a year, I think. They've been talking about those frozen Russian assets. The US said, grab them all. It's your funeral. And they managed to work out this compromise that based on the profits, we can conjure up a loan. That's where it is right now. A principal agreement.
But yeah, it sounds like there's some pushback from the, European elites, because they realize that this is just, they're going to be sacrificing and it's going to be beneficial to the US elites. And so it's nice to see that there's some pushback. But for the most part, they're an international club on the same side. And
they're junior imperialists. That's the way to understand the European proxies of the US. You can take a little bit of loot, but you have to be completely on our side on every topic. Otherwise, you're out. That's how Europe works.
Ian was saying earlier that the policies that the West is implementing is stupid and counterproductive. But again, you have to look at things through the lens of class struggle. And if what the West is trying to do is to further the interests of the people that live in the West, I mean, that would be a true statement. But since all they really care about doing is furthering their own elitist interests, they have a real tough job, and they're doing their best to maintain their own power and hegemony. but they don't care about the population. And so I'm not sure we could say that they're being stupid, you know, and I think that gets lost. Like, I think a lot of people don't understand that. They get confused. Like, well, why is the government doing this? It's really bad for the people. Well, because they don't care about the people and they don't represent the people. And sometimes, you know, it's easy to lose that.
I had some comments on that, but I don't want to reach the end of the show before saying I really want to hear from Greg. It always feels like you're being drowned
sorry,
out.
Greg. Yes. Hey, Greg is a therapist and he's a professional listener. And so, he's a great listener. So, yeah, Greg, any input?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how China's and Russia's U.S. policy were written in the 40s, basically.
What was written in the 40s?
Our foreign policy towards both Russia and China.
I'd say the 90s, but maybe, just very slightly above.
I mean, look at the Ukraine policy, right? I mean, we started supporting the Nazis in Ukraine in 1945, and Taiwan, the late 40s. Containment for both.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The aircraft carriers.
Kuomintang, who have now flipped.
Mm-hmm. I think what's interesting. Go ahead.
We're definitely entering the era of a new Cold War. I mean, that is obvious. The question is, how long can it stay cold for? But yeah, the Cold War policies of several decades, really, you know, put in place by what's his name, Kennan, George Kennan. So those haven't changed, and I mean they're just getting more aggressive, if anything, and they're going to be getting more aggressive. But that's absolutely true.
As for the elite and their education system, you know, the Ivy League, I think this needs to be added. It might be true what Carlos said, that there are actually well-rounded, well-educated people in the background somewhere in Washington. But who gets to the fore there and in Europe? Basically, it's geared towards not being smart or intelligent. It's being aimed towards conformism. You know, those who follow, who go to the nice cocktail. Kaya Kallas is a perfect example. She's facing a revolt at home because she's like, I don't know how many billion euros in debt now, the country, and everybody wants her out. And she's just looking at the NATO exit vote. I think the headline was she's looking at the international options now that the domestic policy has turned against her. The previous, the dancing girl, easy on the eye, Sanna Marin, she got Finland into NATO, then fucked off, and now works for Tony Blair. It's this crowd. They don't care about their people. They don't care about all they being in this conformist think tanky elite club without country. They are the cosmopolitan elite. I think that needs to be added about these people. These are the faces, not the thinkers behind, which may or may not exist, but these are the faces that we see.
They're the actors. They're the actors that get put up on the political theater to, you know, tell everybody, don't worry, this is a democracy. This is how it works. And behind the scenes, they're just being dictated to. These policies are being dictated. The elites are deciding who the figureheads are going to be. And if you're not a competent figurehead, you'll get replaced with a more competent figurehead. And I mean, that's what they call democracy. And again, everyone is to blame, and no one is ever to be held responsible. And it's just amazing what they're getting away with. And
that's why
need to wake up.
I don't have any input on these positions. I don't have the right, but if I could, I would choose Baerbock to lead the European Council, where Ursula is now, and I would choose Kaya Kallas to lead NATO, because they would burn it to the fucking ground faster than Gorbachev did the USSR. They would destroy it. That's my vote.
I think what you said earlier about conformity should be further elaborated on. So, like, you know, in the past century, you had the Soviet Union, which I wouldn't call it a post-national union because they didn't cancel nationality. They didn't say, okay, Russians are canceled, Armenians are canceled, Azerbaijan people are canceled. They didn't cancel anybody. But I think what we're looking at now is a post-national idea. Because the Soviet Union was bound by a common ideology, right? Communism, everybody, you know, they didn't cancel nationality, but they unified everybody with a common ideology. And now we have something a little different than that. You have, you know, they actually are canceling nationality. You know, all the subordinate nations of people are canceled, and in the place of national culture and identity, they insist on conformity. That's why people keep referring to globalism as this gray, you know, the World Economic Forum and all that. It's this gray blob. Like, actually, this comment's perfect, you know, because, yeah, I mean, it was, you know, when people talk about, oh, you know, the USSR, you know, at this, you know, all these little ethnic groups were canceled, Ukrainians were canceled or so on. No, they weren't, because it was literally in your passport. It was very big. You know, you have days in school, you know, oh, you know, everybody show up in your national costume, you know, they're very big on ethnic identity. They're very big on that. But now it's kind of the opposite. They want conformity. It's all about conformity. And that's how I would actually define this current block that we're dealing with, this U.S. block right now. It's conformity.
Diversity in appearance, and then conformity in ideology.
Yes, conformity in thought and ideology. Absolutely.
Can I preempt an attack?
Ever been? I mean, isn't this Europe since the end of World War II, though?
I think Europe since the 90s, since the post-Soviet bloc joined it, definitely. Before that, at least east of the Iron Curtain, it was very, very different story.
Yeah.
I just, you know, from experience, I know that there's going to be, if there was like a US leftist listening to you, there would be an attack that you're echoing the right-wing talking points.
The right-wing dog whistles,
you know, they say the same to when Regis Tremblay says that, you know, all the capitals in Europe are starting to look the same. Now, here's the thing. What happened in Europe with this rightward swing, as it call it, far right, whatever you want it, in the recent election, was completely and utterly the failure of what used to be the left. Remember, universities, not just in the US, but here, Sorbonne, all of that was the alternative perspective. It was encouraged for you to be differently. That's where all the anti-war stuff came from. That's where all the Marxists were. And now all the so-called communist parties, so-called social democratic parties, lockstep, exactly the same as the NATO diktat. Exactly the same. That people see there is no alternative anymore. This is just conformed to the Brussels diktat. And that's what they say when they do this, and they vote for someone.
Extremists on the left or the right would disagree with the NATO, perspective. That makes you an extremist, Ben.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I didn't see many on the left other than Sarah Wagenknecht. God bless her soul. Most of the actual communists what do you call it? Parties in Western Europe say this is an imperial war. Russia's being imperialist. They go along lockstep on Gaza, on Russia, Ukraine, everything. And people, by the way, the peace camp didn't rise on the left. No, sir. That's why it came from the right. They see they're opportunists, but they saw an opportunity, a vacuum. Of course they got in, but I don't see it as their win. Their very sophisticated thinking. It's the absolute disgrace of the last 30 years of what is called the left. That is a point I thought was worth making.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned.
I mean, again,
somebody go first.
Okay, I was going to say what you mentioned about the extremities, the far right and the far left. I mean, that net has been expanded to be, you know, everybody that's to the left or to the right of Barack Obama. I know that's kind of what it means now, but that's been true for a while. I think that's a sign of the conformity, because it's true. If you go to very far right echo chambers like, like Stormfront, which for those of you who don't know is a very far right mostly American, anti-Semitic, very, very far right white nationalist thing. And they're all, against NATO. If you go to more left-wing Marxist Leninist type things, you go to the left, you also see against NATO. What you see is in the center, and that's why I say Barack Obama. If you look in the center, everybody, both left and right, is just like, oh, NATO, lesser of two evils kind of thing. And about that far right, I mean, what you said about the failure of communist and leftist parties in Europe, people reject the gray blob. And the only people who reject the gray blob are those ultra nationalists, like Marine Le Pen,
big error.
Those guys, those people reject it. So they vote for them. And it's very interesting to me to see, oh gosh, what's an alternative for Germany?
AfD, if you look at the map,
Yes.
it's as if the DDR still existed. That's the
Yes,
exact.
as if the Iron Curtain was still there. It's just East Germany that supported it. And that's supposed to be a far-right party. You know, they're far-right, they're Nazis. And it's East
Anti-NATO, anti-EU, pro-peace.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sure, they have problematic things in their messaging. Of course they do. So does, Maloney. But that's the rhetoric. They're actual policy positions are fuck this blob, and people, it's just like Trump. People are going to go for the wrecking ball if they don't have an actual alternative.
And what I was going to say, I actually lost my train of thought, but I was going to say though, is what, when did this start? I think I think it's accurate to say it accelerated in the 90s and spread throughout Europe. I think that prototype of the gray blob might have started in West Germany under the Marshall Plan, because that does seem like the West Germany seems like the focal point where you see the most extreme variants of it. But it started at the Frankfurt School, and they were like, okay, we are going to
don't get Carlo too pissed off.
Yeah, we're great. Deconstruct German nationalism, which was, because like if you look at Soviet movies, if you look at East German movies, no one was trying to cancel German identity after World War II. No one was saying, all Germans are Nazis. No one was canceling in the Eastern side of the Iron Curtain. No one was canceling German culture or German ethnicity, but the same can't be said for the West side. So we're going to really turn West Germany into a colony of the USA, into this post-nationalist colony. And then after the Soviet Union was gone, you didn't need to, because while the Soviet Union was there and was a counterweight, was a threat, people had to be kind of at least appear reasonable. But once you had that euphoric honeymoon phase of no Soviet Union, that's when they really accelerated the blob.
Let me ask. Well, actually, Ian,
I kind of agree with you.
Called me the other day. He was very high on your blog, but by the same token, he said he was outraged by the way this panel, through Rockhill, who he thinks is an idiot, treated the Frankfurt School, because he's steeped in the Frankfurt School.
I wish you didn't say
get Frankfurt. That out. That's one of my statements. But what do these right-wing groups think about Burkina Faso and Traore? What do they think about Niger and Mali?
They don't.
That's the answer.
But what they're doing is
that's the answer. That's called racism.
That's not the racism. The racism part is that, financially, I think I mentioned this last time, Europe, most of the business plans here depend on ultra cheap labor, which is imported, which is why the migration so-called crisis is. And what the right can do with this is, people, disgruntled workers who are facing huge, uncertainties because of downward pressure on their jobs. They are looking at who's to blame, and the right points to the migrant. That's what they're doing. It's very opportunistic, but that's where that comes from economic necessity. I mean, there's never is such a thing as workers' shortages. There's only something called ultra cheap workers shortage, which undermines people living, comfortably, normally at home. That's not what the right aims for. It's what they use. It's this divisive tactic to undermine.
Yeah, I would say that the right is very opportunistic, and I think maybe their pro-peace stance and their anti-NATO stance is alive, and they're just using it to get in power, and then
it usually is.
Just like Maloney and Le Pen. Well, we don't know about Le Pen yet. Definitely Maloney. Greg, you were wanting to get in a long time ago.
Yes, sorry, Greg. Sorry.
Yeah. The left collapsing into itself is very older. 1917, right, or 1914, when all the communist and social democratic parties got behind World War One.
Oh, the Sotsdems were very revanchist. Especially later against the Soviets.
And then I was going to point out too how anti-communism has been created as a religion in the West. There's been a religion that's shoved down everybody's throat, cradle to grave, nonstop, day in, day out. Anti-communism. And so you got to kind of give the communists a break for not having their shit together. Because that's it's a very, very daunting hill to climb up. When the entire culture is steeped in anti-communism, it really puts us at a disadvantage. I mean, reality is on our side, truth is on our side, but on the other hand, we're up against this propaganda apparatus and the reality of life that they create for workers, where they're atomized and distracted trying to earn a living, and they have other priorities. They got all these nonsensical things shoved in their faces. So it's a tough chore. I want to move to Israel, but Ian might have had some final thoughts.
I had a closing thought with that. I had a closing thought on that thread, and also it kind of segues into Israel too. So I think it's convenient for what you wanted to bring up. So
do our segue.
So as far as the nationalism and racism thing goes, I think being nationalists to the point of not wanting imperialism, if you have these national, and this comes up even when I'm arguing with like conservative neocons and Republicans online, it's really weird. It kind of shows how the blob is growing, because I'll be arguing with these conservative types. It's like, there's nothing wrong with Arabs. There's nothing wrong with Islam. I've met a bunch of them. They're fine. I don't have any issue. They don't have issues with me, and I don't have issues with them. They're like, well, in Palestine, Palestinians don't even agree with gay marriage. They'll say stuff like that. Well, okay, just because you don't agree with someone, like you can have a Palestinian who's completely, absolutely against gay marriage, and you think gay marriage is fine. Just because they don't agree with you doesn't mean it's good to bomb them. So that's kind of a fallacy to say, oh, because this person doesn't agree with you on everything, it's good to bomb them. So it's ridiculous to say. And also, so if we're going to talk about a multipolar world, I mean, you kind of have to take the good with the bad. And I think there's a lot of people who preach multipolarity but don't actually believe in it. Because if you want multipolarity, you have to accept that the other poles, if every country is allowed to do their own thing, you have to accept that they're not all going to agree.
It's sovereignty by definition.
Yes.
The multipolar world. Yes.
Yes. So that's a good segue into Israel, because it's weird because, 10 years ago, I never in my life would imagine a Republican, being pro gay marriage, pro blah, 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 Democrat talking points. But they've kind of like, oh, well, we should bomb Palestine in the Middle East because they don't agree with gay marriage. It's like,
that's just rhetoric.
We bombed Afghanistan for women's rights, to say that.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why we killed Najibullah. Yeah. Who actually installed women's rights into the fabric of Afghanistan. And his reward was to be caught in the streets and murdered. So, but I essentially agree with Ian's position. Let's go to Gaza. We should talk about Gaza. Very serious.
I know Greg has something to say, so I'll just quickly wrap up what's happened. This peace plan that I think Blinken mentioned 3 times, that it's an Israeli peace plan, but didn't get them to agree. But now Hamas said we want an actual permanent ceasefire. And as the old, mobsters that U.S. diplomacy is, this was basically the response. I think it's worth listening to just 40 seconds.
And Hamas could have answered with a single word.
Sorry, low.
Yes. Instead, Hamas waited nearly 2 weeks and then proposed more changes, a number of which go beyond positions that it previously taken and accepted. As a result, and you heard the Prime Minister say this, the war that Hamas started on October 7th with this barbaric attack on Israel and on Israeli civilians will go on. More people will suffer.
Sorry, that's basically it. It's all you. We had this peace plan. You were supposed to just say yes, and everything that happened since you didn't say yes is on you. It's all Hamas.
Right. Story depends on uninformed people.
That kind of rhetoric appeals to uninformed people. Also, I mean, that clip wasn't the one that talked about, hey, if Hamas would just lay down their arms, the aid will come in, right? Which is admitting that, you're using aid and collective punishment, all war crimes, to put pressure on Hamas to surrender. But and I also want to point out that Ben, was it last episode or the episode before that? We were talking about the northern border, and Ben, made the outright point that, Israel is, threatening to open up a northern front against Hezbollah, against Lebanon, and it's the U.S. that is desperately trying to avoid it. And I think that's the context within which this U.S. peace proposal was put forth. And then then the propaganda war ensues about who to blame. How can we blame the right people for not accepting this? And so, of course, the West is just, Israel's public relations, outlet, and trying to, it's Hamas's fault. But meanwhile, Israel isn't isn't accepting it, even though the U.S. lies outright, says, "Oh, Israel has accepted it." Israel's saying, "No, we don't accept it." And then, of course, Hamas just doesn't want to accept anything that's going to benefit Israel, and that's the only peace process that we're going to allow to be passed is one that benefits Israel and allows them to go back in a week or two.
That's it. That's the point. It's not permanent. That's the point. I think Benny Gantz, who resigned, said maybe we should accept the exchange, and in 2 years we can relaunch the war. That's already been said in the open. I just want to add that the first day of the G7, hosted by Maloney, was dedicated to MENA, which is Middle East, North Africa, that region. And most of the headlines came out, all of us, Israel not part of the G7, are trying to avoid an explosion in the Middle East. They're doing their best to try to avoid an explosion, while the leadership in the Knesset is doing their utmost, their damnedest, while North Israel is burning, thanks to Hezbollah, is trying to break out a major thing that involves the US. Yeah, that is still my perspective on this.
I've been trying to get up to speed on Palestine. And this genocide has been going on since 1947. It's very clear. Back then, there was something called the consultancy, and they met in Ben Gurion's house. And it was all the elite members, all the elite Zionists, let's put it that way. Not people who were born in Palestine at all, primarily from Europe. And they, among other things they discussed, was starving. This is 1947, starving the Muslim population, and I also they formed 12 brigades, and they went in with the express manifest orders to get everybody out of the villages, get all the Muslims out, get all the Christians out, shoot Christians, shoot Muslims. Only the Druze were more or less spared because they went along with Israel and they went and took part in the slaughter and in the exiling of people. So this genocide has been going on ever since then in one form or another. So it's heartbreaking. I mean, it was planned all along. When the Zionists went in, they had a firm plan of taking over the whole of Palestine, and that's what they're still doing.
They weren't going to stop at Palestine. I mean, Greater Israel includes Syria, Lebanon, Egypt,
Jordan,
parts of Saudi Arabia.
And that's why they've never declared their borders, because once they declare their borders, their expansion would be done. So they've never declared their borders. And they don't have a constitution because they don't want to explicitly say, hey, we're a racist colony, of Jews, everybody else is a second-class citizen. So there's no constitution. There's no declared borders. It's a pariah. The United Nations in the 70s declared Zionism to be a racist ideology. And then once the Soviet Union collapsed, that got repealed as the West was able to dominate that international institution. But Zionism is racism. Everybody knows that, and it's always been so. But, it's the Western propaganda, Western PR gets people to support it. They get a lot of Christians in this country to support it from a bullshit eschatology that if anybody has any knowledge of the Bible realizes that's stupid. It's a fucked up interpretation of the scriptures. It's just erroneous.
Revelation, yeah.
It's not working. I don't know about the American, general public, but in Europe, 1 out of 10 people is maybe an Israel supporter. This is separate from the elite people you meet anywhere. They see the horror. I'm not going to show the Nusrat massacre, this free the hostages, horrible pictures coming out of that crap. But I want to say, Carlo mentioned starving people. That's a war crime. But even before October 7, they sort of calibrated how many calories it takes, for Palestine to just exist, or something, but basic,
Well, I forgot. Anyway, I forgot my initial thing, but I don't know if you, our viewers, or anyone's familiar with the comedian Bill Hicks. He died several decades ago, but he used to do a take about U.S. foreign policy, and he based it on a B movie, and I can't remember the actor used to play a villain, and so he wants to steal this farmer's land, so he throws the gun down on the ground and he tells the farmer to pick up the gun, and the farmer says, "Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that." Pick up the gun. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And then finally the farmer, he's in a terrible situation. He reaches for the gun, and the villain shoots him, and he goes, "He had a gun." And that's really the situation that I see the Palestinians being in now. And one thing that I've learned is initially they didn't want to fight. The IDF would go in there and or whatever it was at that time called, and they would just like pick a fight. They'd march 7 or 8 young men out, shoot them in the head,
and then laugh about it in interviews later, giggle about it.
Exactly. Yes.
It's the manufacturing of what that is, coercing someone to pick up a gun, is the manufacturing of consent.
That's another
different from the Chomsky definition, but I understand what you're saying.
Yes. And
by the way, Chomsky's unwell.
Manufacturing a pretext, a justification, ad hoc. Yeah.
Look what you made me do.
To Chomsky.
I think he's unwell. He might be on his last legs, and although I don't respect his perspective, I think he gave the world a lot. So I thought maybe,
yeah, he did.
It shows. Really, it's sickening. It's not even just the imagery coming from the Palestinian side. It's the imagery the Israeli side themselves are putting out. Wearing women's underwear, burning books, sniffing kids' shoes that you just killed.
Most moral army, for fuck's sake.
Yes, but at the end of the day, it's genocide because it's weakness, because they're from a military perspective, no closer to victory than they were 8 months ago.
They're closer to collapse than victory.
Yes,
to be honest. Yeah. Which is interesting, coming at the same time as Ukraine. By the way, I wanted to ask: is the Sumy not offensive? Is there anything going on in Sumy region, according to you? Because I've only seen some Telegram chats. One official, Zelensky, saying we had a counteroffensive, it was successful, and then it disappeared from Ukrainska Pravda. So is there something there? Because it's just 2 colonial armies, basically, or proxy armies on the verge of collapse at the same time is what it looks to be.
I don't know if it's in Ukraine, it's Sumy and Kharkov region.
Kharkov is established, but is there anything actually happening in Sumy?
Well, what's happening is, and that's kind of what I thought was going to happen with the opening of that Kharkov front. It gave Ukraine kind of an impossible choice, because they have finite reserves. They could let that new front do what they will, or they could pull reserves from other areas of the front and stabilize that front, but lose territory in the Donbass front. And that looks like that's basically what's happened. There's a military saying, he who defends everything defends nothing. Because they're spreading thin, trying to defend everything, and what that ends up translating to is this: Russia makes gains on all fronts because they're trying to defend everything. And I think I mentioned on a previous show here, it's kind of a reversal of the situation Russia was under in fall of 2022, when they had a numerical disadvantage and an extended front, and they left that Kharkov region, shortened the front, and that stabilized the front, giving up a lot of territory. And that stabilized the front. But Ukraine is not willing to give up territory. And unfortunately, in the Kharkov region, they can't give up territory there. They can't endanger that city, because if Kharkov falls, that will roll up the whole front. It's the second largest city in Ukraine. It's too much.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to fully go back to Ukraine. I just wanted
Tony Blinken. He gave credit to Ukraine stopping the Russian offensive. He gave that credit to the most recent escalation of allowing Ukraine to use their standoff U.S. supplied missiles to hit Russia.
They've been doing that since the beginning, though.
Yeah, that's just the PR declaration. I'm waiting for the F-16.
I was trying to say it sarcastically, but it didn't come out sarcastically. But yeah, no, the idea that Russia tried to take Kharkov, but they failed, and that offensive has failed because the U.S. gave Ukraine permission to use these missiles. It's just so dumb.
That's the takeaway from the hugely successful Washington Post owned by Jeff Bezos, that they stalled an offensive. What a stupid thing.
Yeah.
God bless them.
I just want to say I watch these guys that put the map of Ukraine up and then go from one region to another to describe the combat, and they're claiming that the Sumy region is on the brink of being taken, and when it does, that will open the floodgates for Russians. I don't know how reliable they are, but
that's the thing. On the rumors, I've seen it in kind of a rumor, the scuttlebutt thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, loudmouth Kadyrov said we're going in there to take Sumis, but that's never to be taken seriously at the time of when he says these things. We'll see.
So, one of the Telegram channels, Intel Slava Z, which is, pro-Russian, obviously, they talked about what Putin was saying. Shit. Excuse me. They talked about what, Putin was saying vis-a-vis the demands or the peace proposal. And basically at the end, it's like, if they are not accepted, the conditions will be different in the future. And so that's what I was kind of alluding to previously. The conditions will be different in the future. And to me, I kind of read that as, they're taking the gloves off. It'll be a more aggressive, approach, not a special military operation, but maybe more of an all-out war. So, okay, that's just me reading into, one Telegram channel's, explanation of what Putin was saying. The conditions will be different in the future. Anyway, we will see. Any final thoughts? We're at an hour and a half in, and it's been a good discussion. I have appreciated everybody's input. Nobody has
show a quick clip of this, because this is a reaction to Putin's peace proposal that came out today from, I always want to call him Ermak, because half of the articles say it, and that sounds like, there was a Mortal Kombat character, right, called Ermak. I think there was, which is based, it doesn't matter. This is Yermak, one of the giants, the main aides of Zelensky. And this was his, I think, hysterical reaction to this.
Найбільше питання у деяких країн, чому не запрошуєте Росію? Як це можна без Росії говорити про мир? Знаєте, щоб це зрозуміти, просто можна перейти до такого грубого, але дуже очевидного прикладу. Це як би ви сьогодні вирішували відповідальність за злочин, посадивши за один стіл.
Who cares? But basically childhood fables. I don't know of any single war that ended in negotiations without the victor, but that was the quick response from, 5 camera angles, very well produced response from the Ukraine side.
Playing the victim.
As you will. Yeah, they're too victim to talk. Is basically what it is.
I just want to say one thing. The actor I couldn't remember before was Jack Palance, but I do want to salute Che Guevara. And what do we get? We get Felix Rodriguez, who cut off his hands and stole his watch. That tells you all you need to know about U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
The great Iran-Contra felon, but...
And the CIA asset chick who was meant to get close to her and kill her, but actually fell in love with her. I just like that angle.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for the discussion and all the commentary. We will reconvene on Tuesday. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much.